to be with you on a Free to Choose Friday, where we're focusing more on just some of the dynamics of the RNC and the DNC and the two big differences, the key distinctions, rather, between these two conventions in a variety of different areas. But one that was most stark, I think, was the way in which the Republicans talked about the mayhem going on across the country in terms of the violent so-called protests and the devastation that they're causing our communities, contrasted with the Democrats who just, it seems, avoided the topic altogether. And I want to play a clip. This is cut 2. President Trump making his strong points about what, in his view, is sort of the Democrat standpoint, what they're allowing in the country from his standpoint. Here's what he had to say.
At the Democrat National Convention, Joe Biden and his party repeatedly assailed America as a land of racial, economic, and social injustice. So tonight I ask you a simple question. How can the Democrat Party ask to lead our country when it spends so much time tearing down our country? In the left's backward view, they do not see America as the most free, just, and exceptional nation on earth. Instead, they see a wicked nation that must be punished for its sins. Our opponents say that redemption for you can only come from giving power to them. This is a tired anthem spoken by every repressive movement throughout history. But in this country, we don't look to career politicians for salvation. In America, we don't turn to government to restore our souls. We put our faith in Almighty God.
So in a moment, we're going to dive into how stark these differences really are. That's President Trump sort of setting the tone there about his discussion. And we're going to talk about what we're seeing across the country and how the Democrats were avoiding it last week versus how the Republicans now have been making their convention centered on it. And also centered on this idea that, look, America is a wonderful nation that always needs to improve. And we're always striving to improve as a people. That is what being patriotic Americans is about, too. It's about showing pride in your country. Which is why I'm excited about what we'll see here in the photo of the week. We'll get to all the content in a moment, but I want to get to our photo of the week on this Friday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, brought to you by Joshua Sharf Photography. Imagine this on the wall of your newly reopened or newly opened doctor's office, co-working space, or conference room. This photo of the week is a stunning, look at that, really cool view of the United States, the flag of the United States on the Brooklyn Bridge. If you were feeling patriotic this week, watching the Republican National Convention and the honoring of our country and our flag, this is the kind of image you want on your wall. I mean, look, whether you're looking for something bold for an investment firm, soothing for a doctor's office, or thematic for a co-working space, Joshua Sharf Photography has the artwork you will love. It's truly phenomenal. You might be decorating your own space or an interior designer working on someone else's project. Either way, give Joshua Sharf Photography a call at 303-520-7503 or log on to photo.jsharf.com today. From idea to proof and digital to the fine print, Joshua will produce the perfect art to fulfill your creative vision for you and your client. Check him out. Phenomenal guy. Phenomenal outdoor photography. Joshua Sharf Photography, photo.jsharf.com. I really love that picture, too. I mean, again, the patriotism right there before you. That could be on your wall, by the way. But the patriotism that we're feeling this week for much of what happened in the convention, I think is pretty apparent in a lot of ways. But look, the reality is that we have two different perceptions of what's happening in America that were on display last week compared with this week. Last week, the Democrats hardly said anything. I don't even think they said anything about the looting, the riots, the attacks, the violence, all the things that have been happening from these so-called protests. Now, this week, they're changing their tune a bit. Vice President, former Vice President Joe Biden has said that he condemns the burning of businesses and so forth that have been happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the aftermath of the police shooting death of Jacob Blake. He's speaking out then this week, but last week he didn't say a peep about anything that was going on in our streets. This semblance of fear that is gripping a lot of America when they're wondering if their business is going to stay intact. When they're wondering if they're going to be able to keep their business. When they're wondering if they're going to be safe as all this mayhem spreads. Democrats finally talking about it. Last week they didn't. This week, the Republican National Convention put a big spotlight on this violence. In cut 3, President Trump talks a little bit about this sort of topic as well.
The most dangerous aspect of the Biden platform is the attack on public safety. The Biden-Bernie manifesto calls for abolishing cash bail, immediately releasing 400,000 criminals onto the streets and into your neighborhoods. When asked if he supports cutting police funding, Joe Biden replied, yes, absolutely. When Congresswoman Ilhan Omar called the Minneapolis Police Department a cancer that is rotten to the root, Biden wouldn't disavow her support and reject her endorsement. He proudly displayed it shortly later on his website. Displayed it in big letters. Make no mistake, if you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America. They will pass federal legislation to reduce law enforcement nationwide. They will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. My administration will always stand with the men and women of law enforcement.
Now, not only did President Trump talk about it himself and some of the other speakers, but certain speakers provided personal and powerful testimonials to what's going on and helped to really put forward this dichotomy between what the Trump administration, what his view and his administration's view of law and order and security and safety is versus the Democrats. One of the most heart-wrenching stories is about David Dorn, the retired police officer who was killed while defending a young friend and mentee's business. He was killed by so-called protesters. And his wife, Ann Dorn, sent in a truly powerful and emotional video message that is bar none one of the most powerful, and there were a lot of them, most powerful speeches at the Republican National Convention. But what this speech does is it underscores two things. Number one, watch for this. What is the difference that they're trying to present from a messaging standpoint at this convention about the Republican view on safety versus the Democratic view on safety?
It was a violent night in St. Louis. 4 officers were shot. Others were hit with rocks and fireworks. At least 5 businesses were damaged, looted, or set on fire. As the Officer Wellness Coordinator and CIT Coordinator with the police department, I was keenly aware of the rioting and spent the evening getting ready to mobilize support for officers who were impacted. After I'd gone to bed, David received a call from Lee's Alarm Company. The front door of the pawn shop had been breached. This time he didn't wake me up to tell me. He probably knew I would have tried to stop him or insist on going with him. As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood, and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on Earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. How did we get to this point where so many young people are callous and indifferent towards human life? This isn't a video game where you can commit mayhem and then just hit reset and bring all the characters back to life. David is never coming back to me. He was murdered by people who didn't know and just didn't care. He would have done anything to help them. Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest. They do not safeguard Black lives. They only destroy them.
That was powerful and emotional. And it underscores something very critical, is that there has been a narrow band of Black lives that the Democrats are talking about versus all Black lives. That is to say, they're focusing on a certain aspect of the issue, but not all. I mean, is it not the case that David Dorn's Black Life mattered? Just as one of many examples. How about all of the young Black children who have been killed in our streets in recent weeks tied to these protests? It is unspeakable what we are seeing everywhere around this country. And having Ann Dorn speak sent a clear message on the one hand about the RNC and its differences with the DNC, but also sent an important message that Republicans absolutely care about Black lives. There's no doubt about that. Democrats do not have a monopoly on that because they put out a hashtag. David Dorn's life is one of many Black lives that matters. And by the way, when the George Floyd killing happened, Americans of all stripes were outraged. Outraged at a man, and a Black man especially, having his neck squished by a man's knee. A heinous act on the part of a police officer. The whole nation was outraged with that, conservatives included, Republicans included. And yet they've been able to paint this picture that, no, it was just one group, the left, that was outraged. Not the case at all. We're at a point in time where they had a moment. They had a moment when George Floyd died to really bring about reform and change. And instead, the whole perception has been changed. The reality is different now in terms of what could have been done versus what has been done in terms of the violence and mayhem in the streets used to get a message across, I guess. Although, as we've talked about in this program, it's no longer about a message. Having Ann Dorn present her powerful story shows that President Trump, this is number 2, shows that President Trump supports the police and supports public safety. It's not just about the message difference between the RNC and the DNC. It's about the agenda difference and the focus on making sure that there is safety in our communities. The fact that we are still seeing businesses destroyed 3 months later should be chilling to every American. Now, what's so interesting as well is the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans on how they've been presenting things on this issue. So Joe Biden this week just started finally talking about how he is started condemning in strong words the looting and the violence and the chaos in the streets. Relatively strong words. Okay. Over the weekend here in Colorado, I'm broadcasting from Jared Polis, Colorado's governor, and the mayor of Denver, Michael Hancock, both finally used stronger language to condemn destruction, mayhem that was going on in Denver over the weekend. Months later. Now, why is this? Don Lemon, let's go to cut 13 here, please, Mr. Matoush. Don Lemon over on CNN has changed his tune. He's been hiding, not addressing the riots and violence or downplaying it that's been going on in our streets. Well, now, earlier this week, he had an awakening at the same time as Joe Biden had an awakening, at the same time as Colorado Governor Jared Polis had an awakening. They're waking up, folks, to what's happening and recognizing, oh, the Democrats, Don Lemon says, have a blind spot here that they cannot ignore. Roll the tape.
The Democrats want to define what we see around the country every time there's one of these cases, like now in Kenosha. The symptom is the protest. The symptom is the riot and opportunists. You have the bad actors. And then you have people who went there for the right reason and now did the wrong things. It's all true. And they're rioters, not protesters, and they're criminals as a result, and they are exhibiting what they say they oppose. But to Trump, the riots are the problem. See, and this is the key, Don. This is why the polling is shifting. Maria, I don't know if we have it to put up right now, but you'll see from June till now, we're seeing voters shift in terms of how they see these incidents. Mm-hmm. And they see them more now about riots than about legitimate protests.
The riots and the protests have become indistinguishable.
Here it is.
And again, the only thing that's sticking in focus groups. And that's why I said that that this is a blind spot for Democrats. They don't want to believe it. And when you say what you said just now about, what is the symptom of whatever, that's all well and good, but you can't put that on a bumper sticker. Do you know what I'm saying?
Blind spot for Democrats. Not CNN, not Don Lemon, not Chris Cuomo for weeks and weeks, but the Democrats. Okay, yes. It is, in fact, a blind spot for the Democrats. At a minimum. But it seems like it's something they have not wanted to even address. Let's put up that poll that CNN was just showing. After George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, do you think the demonstrations are mostly legitimate, people acting unlawfully and unsure? Look at that increase in terms of people acting unlawfully and mostly legitimate. That's one poll there. Then let's put up pick one, this Rasmussen Reports poll, which shows some stark numbers that are helping to demonstrate a change in tune here. 72% voters concerned about the growing level of violent protests. 43% are very concerned. 62% say the growing level of violent protests is important to their vote. 35% saying it is very important. And these numbers keep rising. This is increasingly a law and order election in many respects because people are noticing the destruction of businesses. Insurance isn't enough. I've seen video of shopkeepers who've just been devastated and saying insurance isn't enough. This isn't just something you can say, oh, you have insurance, so rely on that. Insurance doesn't cover a lot of things. It takes a long time to rebuild your business. What this shows is that if you support the violence, if you defend, at least defend or deflect from condemning the mayhem and the chaos and the destruction and the looting and the rioting and the attacks on these communities, then you are in effect condoning it and okay with it. And in effect, okay with our economy recovering even more slowly because you are allowing this to happen. And only now are Democrats starting to more or less speak out a little bit about it. Don Lemon this week, Chris Cuomo changing their tune, Joe Biden. But then you scratch your head when you hear a clip like this. Let's go to cut 9. This is Kamala Harris on Stephen Colbert's show a couple of nights ago. And you scratch your head wondering, okay, what is she really saying here when she says they're not going to stop?
Clear that I know that there are protests still happening in major cities across the United States. I'm just not seeing the reporting on it that I had
that's right.
for the first few weeks.
That's right. But they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. And they're not, this is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And everyone should take note of that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not. And we should not.
You know, on Twitter, folks were saying, oh, you saw that smirk, you saw her statement. Is she just talking about the peaceful protests, or is she talking about what else has been going on in terms of the riots and the looting? And I have to say, it's hard to tell in that video. My guess is she's probably talking about the peaceful protesting, but what is the peaceful protesting now? To what extent is there actually peaceful protesting versus the riots that we have been seeing? But we've experienced it here in Colorado. I've talked about the pro-police rally Colorado, 6th annual Law Enforcement Appreciation Day rally, where we weren't able even to speak. Hardly got words in, hardly got music in. I was part of the band. And we saw fights break out instantaneously, in no time. When we were surrounded and swarmed in Civic Center Park. And guess what, folks? The police hardly did anything, and were even told to retreat, as we've talked about on this show. We're told to retreat, and one lieutenant bravely broke ranks and refused the order because he knew what would happen. My recollection is that there was only one arrest made. Only one arrest made at that rally, when it was completely shut down by a group of thugs organized by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We hardly got started, folks, with the rally. That is what's happening, and what has been happening for months, and only now they are starting to talk about it. And even then, you wonder what they're really meaning, and if they really stand by their view, or if it's simply because the polls are now showing that Americans are growing with concern. And of course they should be growing with concern. Let's go to cut 11 here. Just last night, after the Republican National Convention, Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky, who spoke at the RNC on, I believe, Wednesday night, Rand Paul and his wife were walking back to their hotel, and they were completely surrounded and accosted by extremists. And here's some video of that occasion last night. So that's what was going on. He could hardly get by. Hardly a United States senator could hardly get by in the middle of the night. And he knew what could come. We showed footage of Denver, completely unprovoked, when they swarmed a peaceful gathering for the 6th year. I've been participating in it for the past several years, and it was the 6th annual event. If that kind of thing can happen, of course, a United States senator should fear for the life of himself and his wife. In Cut 12, Rand Paul was on Fox and Friends today. And I want to break down this clip, so we'll pause it a couple times along the way. But Rand Paul told his story, and I absolutely agree with his perception. And keep in mind this, and he mentions it. Let's keep this in mind. Rand Paul introduced and wrote the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. That was the instance where you had a black woman who was in her home, Breonna Taylor, and the police stormed in the middle of the night in a no-knock raid, and she ended up dead, and it was the wrong house. She was not even in the right apartment. And Senator Rand Paul put in this bill which would ban no-knock raids. Keep that in mind as you watch this clip.
You know, we came out of the speech
at the White House.
We looked into the street. Our hotel was only right across the street from the White House, but we couldn't go because the mob was already chasing people down that chose to go out that exit. So the Secret Service says, get on a bus and ride to the Trump Hotel. So we got on a bus. It took 45 minutes to get through all the mobs. We get there safely, and then we say we'll get an Uber to go all the way back where we came from, and we wanted to be dropped off at the hotel. But as we got close to it, the streets were blocked and no one would let us through. And what happened is there was 2 blocks, and I regret that I made this decision, but I said we're going to walk the 2 blocks. We walked 1 block, but as we walked 1 block, we could see some police in the distance, but we also saw a mob of about 30 people marching and yelling. They all of a sudden saw me right as we got to the policeman, fortunately, or I don't think we'd have survived. We got to the policeman, and the policeman, I don't think, recognized me. And as they came closer, they were shouting my name, and the crowd doubled to 60. And then it doubled again to 120. And as they were surrounding us, and it got closer and closer, and everybody kept pushing back, the policemen were forming a barricade with their bodies. I whispered to the policeman, they know who I am. You've got to get reinforcements. It's going to get worse. He called for reinforcements, but we didn't get any reinforcements. We waited, but the crowd was getting bigger and bigger and pushing in. They were yelling threats. They were trying to push the police over to get to me. They were grabbing at us. And it got worse and worse and worse. And then finally we decided to make a move. I said, we've got to move. If there's not going to be reinforcements, we have to try to get to the hotel, which was another block.
Pause it.
And they were shouting.
So as we watch Rand Paul there telling that story, you can understand why he would have the perception that he did in terms of his own safety. Police reinforcements were not coming. It was just him with a couple of officers and his wife. And they needed to get through that crowd. And at least the officer who he was clinging on to make sure that they were all okay and all together, that officer was there providing the kind of safety that he needed. As a United States Senator in Washington, D.C., these so-called protesters were surrounding him, yelling at him, threatening him, and making it difficult for them to walk. They were being obstructive. Let's continue.
Threats, you know, to us, to kill us, to hurt us, but they're also shouting, say her name, Breonna Taylor. And it's like, you couldn't reason with this mob, but I'm actually the author of the Breonna Taylor law to end no-knock raids. So the irony is lost on these idiots that they're trying to kill the person who's actually trying to get rid of no-knock raids. And they were shouting and screaming and just, these people were unhinged.
Pause it there.
But I can't tell you
Let me go back to the Breonna Taylor Act. Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. Senator Paul, this is according to the press release, quote, Senator Paul's Justice for Breonna Taylor Act would require federal law enforcement officers to provide notice of their authority and purpose before they could execute a warrant, and it would require the same of any state or local law enforcement agency that receives funds from the Department of Justice, which is pretty much every local and state law enforcement agency. Saying if you're going to get money from the federal government, or if you are a federal law enforcement officer, no-knock raids are forbidden, and you must have a demonstrable warrant. You must have an authority and a purpose laid out before you can execute such a warrant, effectively ending no-knock raids. Let's continue.
I'm not sure we would have made it. So as we're walking, sort of surrounded by the police, they're attempting to push the police over to get to me. So at one point, they push a policeman backwards. He stumbles, and he's trying to catch his balance, and I catch the back of his flak jacket to stabilize him and, you know, make sure that he's okay, because he's our defense. I mean, if he's down, the mob's loose on us. And you've seen the pictures of what they do to you. If the police are not there, if you defund the police, if we become Portland, if America becomes Portland, what's going to happen is people are going to be pummeled and kicked in the head and left senseless on the curb. That would have happened to us. I promise you, had we not had the D.C. police to support us, I mean, we are thankful that we have police, and we've got to wake up. We can't have the whole country. We can't have Joe Biden rule the country and have no police. I mean, we can't walk down the street in D.C. safely now. That's how bad it is.
So what's interesting here is Rand Paul's experience that last night after the convention events, festivities wrapped up at the White House, underscore the points made in the convention about what we're seeing in the streets across the country. You look at President Trump's address, and he talks about the importance of safety and stakes claim to the idea that the Republican Party is advocating for the safety of Americans, not the Democratic Party when it comes to police. So that's his campaign point. Well, then Rand Paul, a United States senator, is accosted like this, obstructed in these ways, and it proves the point about what's happening in our country right now. But I want to put up pick 2. Because Chris Hayes is a host over on MSNBC, and he put out a tweet this morning. And I found it so striking, especially since I had been to Tea Party events in 2011 and so forth. I remember saying this during the Tea Party protests, and I'll say it now. Screaming at elected officials is quite literally one of the blessings of liberty and living in a free society. Let me read that again. Screaming at elected officials is quite literally one of the blessings of liberty and living in a free society. Mr. Matoush, please put up footage again of what happened last night with Rand Paul. Because this is not just screaming at a politician. What happened during the Tea Party movement, you had some examples where people would show up to town halls and they would scream at politicians expressing their anger. But they wouldn't surround them. They wouldn't accost them. They wouldn't obstruct them. There isn't a history of Tea Partiers showing up at the rally of political opponents, I guess, surrounding them, swarming them, attacking them, starting to beat on them. There aren't instances of Tea Party rallies spontaneously breaking out and destroying businesses and looting property and beating people up on the regular. That's just not what's happening. This kind of description does not fit the Tea Party movement at all. This was an instance of so-called protesters trying to obstruct and harm, threatening a United States senator and his wife as they try to work their way through that crowd with limited law enforcement support present for them. 1, 2 officers. and that is screaming and exercising your rights, there is no right to obstruct, to attack, to accost, whether it's a United States senator or somebody who's showing up to their business or a rally. Of course, Rand Paul should have been fearful. We've seen this pattern of behavior going on at these riots. And the idea that this is equivalent in any way to anything that happened during the Tea Party movement is absurd. Chris Hayes is dishonest in every way, shape, or form with that tweet. Yes, screaming at a politician is one thing. Doing what they did last night or have been doing all over the place is entirely different. And that tweet, let's put it back up, please, Mr. Matoush. That tweet of Chris Hayes on MSNBC again emphasizes the dichotomy that the Republican convention was presenting between the Republicans and the Democrats, the left and the right. That's what that tweet exemplifies. Because when you look at that video of what happened to Rand Paul, or you look at all the other things that we've been seeing, it's abundantly apparent. It's abundantly apparent that they're sowing this mayhem, that there's a strategy here, that it is intentional, and that it is not an expression of rights. Because guess what, folks? And this is Free to Choose Friday, so it's a fundamental point, and you know it's a great one to end on, too. My rights stop when they start trampling upon your rights. And the fundamental role of government in the first place is to protect my rights from others and your rights from others. That's what America is about. That's what the Constitution is about. That's why we have our systems and structures that we do. Because we need to protect individual rights. That's the fundamental cornerstone of our society. And when you have people at these riots shouting, F property, F property, you know that their goal is to advance an extreme left agenda, full stop. And it is not that they are trying to advance some just or noble cause. It is that they do not believe in property. They will vandalize it. They will destroy it. They will burn down businesses, crush people's dreams. And they will do it because they don't believe in the importance of private property or individual rights. If they did, not only would they not say things like F property, but they wouldn't erode on other people's rights, transcend on other people's rights. They wouldn't destroy people's businesses, prevent them from being able to speak or play music, prevent them from being able to walk to their hotel. That's not justifiable. That's not right. That's not Tea Party-esque. That's anti-American and un-American. Full stop. And I just wonder when a guy like Chris Hayes will get the message. Don Lemon at least seemed to this week. Wonder how many more people will start looking at the polling data and changing their tune more. Some are, a little bit, but still have a ways to go. But more and more people, more and more Americans are waking up to this, and it should be a teachable moment about the importance and value of individual liberty and about why we should protect the rights of the individual, including property rights, including their safety and well-being. Thanks for watching this clip of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel. You do not want to miss our live show. Thanks for your support.
I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.
Awesome. Brilliant.